Or maybe you wake up, or yes, you woke up.
Erev Tov, everyone. This year is Lili Nishmas Rachaleah, Bas Moshe Ezra, the mother of Miriam Knecht, Nishama should have an Aliyah. We have to really try and understand what's the problem here with Pharaoh. What does it stem from? That he would enslave the Jewish people and that it would become such a factor in his life and in the national life of Egypt that no matter what blows fall upon him, he's not going to give in. So the Torah gives us a hint in last week's parsha. It says, "Vayokom melech chodesh al Mitzrayim, asher lo yoda es Yosef." So the Meforshim all discuss, why does it say asher lo yoda? It says, it should say shelo hikir es Yosef. How could it be asher lo yoda? He didn't know about Yosef. Because he's not oblivious to the history of the regime, and he sees that he has these millions of aliens in his midst. So how could it be that it doesn't bother him, that he doesn't ask any questions? How did they get here? Who are they? What are they doing here? And why, for a long period in the history of Egypt, they were allowed to be there free and prosperous. So Oyoda means he wasn't curious. It's not that he didn't know. He wasn't interested in knowing. He's not curious about the whole thing. He doesn't want to know the background. He only sees what's in front of him. So the word Yoda has to do with an intimate knowledge. It's not, I know you. If you're my good friend, so then I can say, I know you. If you're a chance acquaintance, I don't really know you. I can say hello to you on the street, but I don't know you. And we find that later in the Joshua, in the Haggadah, as Vayeda Elokim. The Rabboni Shalom knew what was going on. So the Haggadah says, Zu Prishus Derech Eretz was the most intimate detail. That from this slavery, there was no intimacy in marriage. And we see generally in the Hebrew language and in Chumash and Tanakh that the description for the act, the conjugal act of living together is always Vayeda Odom Eschavo Ishto, Vayeda Avro. Because in order to understand the person, you have to be curious about the person, and therefore you have to delve into the intimacy of that person, who that person was. Now, Pharaoh has a defect. His defect is, the portion pointed out, that he's haughty. He says, who is God that I should recognize him? He pretends that he's superhuman. He has no physical needs. There's no humility in Pharaoh. And without humility, there are no good traits. There are no good habits that people have. So, Asher lo yoda es Yosef means that there was no hakoras hatov, there was no recognition. He wasn't curious at all. Doesn't know that Yosef saved Mitzrayim in the world. He's not interested in it. And Moshe, his task is to bring das to Pharaoh. Pharaoh will say, "Mi Hashem, what kind of Hashem? Whom should I listen to? Him? Who, what?" Moshe wants to impress that he should be curious about it. He should have an idea as to why. We will say later, the pasuk that we have in Tanakh, Laman das kol amei haaretz, ki Hashem hu Elokim. So there also, it's not to recognize, and it's not in the English translation, it's not to know, but to be curious about it. We see the secret of Moshe Rabbeinu is that he's curious. Asura no v'eres amare hagodol hazeh madu alo yivar hasneh. So the Kotzker says a famous idea that the snare was burning for everybody, but people walked by. Look at that, it's still burning, I have, I have carpool today. I'm busy. I'm not curious about it. Moshe says, Asura no v'eres amare hagodol madu alo yivar. He's curious. Why? Someone who is curious about events and about past events, so then sooner or later he ends up speaking with God, so to speak. He has a connection to things. The world should ask, how come the Jewish people are still around? It's a valid question. Should be discussed in all the universities. It's not even discussed in the Jewish universities. Nobody's curious. Why? How could it be? How could it be that 5,000 beepers went off at once? Be curious about it. Oh, it's a good trick. They did something clever. It's that lack of curiosity that brings Pharaoh to be such a stubborn person. He's not interested to know the story. So it doesn't have Hakaras Hatov to Yosef. He doesn't have Hakor Satov to Avraham Avinu. He doesn't have Hakor Satov all the way back. It's nothing to do with him. We see that in the world played out over and over again. That without the character trait of humility and the ability to be grateful, so then humanity is lost. It makes no difference. I often thought you read the book about what the Nazis did. So they erased all the Jews from German history. So they took out Heinrich Heine, who was an apostate Jew. So he wrote the famous poem called The Lorelei. So the Lorelei in German culture was the main poem. It was the Hatikva. Why did they stop for a minute and think, why is the Lorelei the main poem in German literature? After all, you have Goethe and Schiller, you got people. They didn't study quantum physics because they said it was a Jewish science. So you're not allowed to study Einstein because it's a Jewish science. So look where that gets you. You're unable to deal in the world. Imagine if they would have studied it. Imagine if, God forbid, they would have had an atomic program. But that's part of Asher Lo Yoda, and they don't want to know. So the solution is to erase it. That's the child that doesn't do his homework and tells the teacher that the dog ate it. And much of the situation that we find ourselves in, the current situation in the world, the state of Israel, stop and ask, how come there's a state of Israel? It's the most unlikely thing you can imagine. And it isn't even 80 years old. How could it be? So you should stop and ask yourself, well, maybe. And it's not only the non-Jewish world, it's the Jewish world. Nobody asks that question, how come? That's Asher Lo Yoda es Yosef. We don't want to know about Yosef. Because Yosef, if you know about Yosef, so then your policies have to change, your attitudes have to change, your vision has to change. It forces things upon you that you don't want. And Pharaoh is the great example of that. He doesn't want to know, so he doesn't know. Therefore, the Maccas fall upon him in Egypt, one after another. And he's not shaken by it because he doesn't know. And he doesn't want to know. You say, das. Knowledge, knowing. So the Gemara says that that's why we put Atochon Antonu into that brocha Saturday night, because he made das Avdollah Minayin. If there's no knowledge, there's no way to separate things. There's no way to ben Kodesh L'chol, ben Yisrael Amim, ben Yom HaShvi L'Sheshes Me'amasa. Without knowledge, it's impossible. Without Yodah. That's really what I think, what we call common sense. Now, there was a famous maskil that said that the Jewish people are the Am Chochem V'Novon, Mi Goy Godol. They're the greatest, they're the smartest. But he said if the Jewish people only had a little seichel,
He said that.
a little seichel forces us to look at things differently. And that's what the posuk means, Shelo Yoda es Yosef. And so therefore, in this week's parsha, when the Makos begin, Pharaoh is immune to it because he's not curious. He's not interested in the whole story. To him, it's extraneous. That is one of the great lessons of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and one of the lessons that we should repeat to our children and grandchildren at the Seder table, to be able to be curious, to ask why, how come. That brings us to great things. Rabbi Hanania ben Akashi Omer Otzak Kodesh Baruch Hu Uzako says Yisrael Afichach Hirbo Lohem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar